I was thinking, I asked Ashley about it. I was like, what could be a good illustration for this week? And I think she actually gave me a really good one. You guys remember those magic eye hidden 3D pictures, the things that were famous for about 3 seconds in the 90s, right? Here's an example. You remember these things? I love David whenever he's like, is there something wrong with an image that you put up there? I was like, no, that's supposed to look like that. And, there are these, they're usually large squiggly lines everywhere, right? Which themselves are easy enough. You can kind of see there's a pattern in there, right? However, the primary reason for these pictures was what? There's a 3D image somewhere in there. I think it looks like to me on this one, I was like, I think I found it looks kind of like a stork or something, like a two-legged bird. It doesn't really even matter. If you can see it or not, I just didn't want people to go, what in the world is he talking about? I wanted you to see. But if you do remember them, you likely remember it one of two ways, right? Either a delight because you were able to find it, right? What was behind, or frustration like my wife or Andy because you never saw anything but squiggly lines, right? Well, I think sometimes the Old Testament laws can sometimes be like these images, right? There are hundreds of easy to read and see laws at the very forefront of the law. However, the full reason behind the law is not simply do's and don'ts, but a greater image, in a sense, found within. Last 2 weeks we've been going through in Deuteronomy looking at the purpose of the law, right? That it was never meant to be a salvation-earning instruction, right? Never meant to be salvific. Instead, it was given to Israel to help them to gain wisdom in righteousness and guide them to lives of justice based upon that righteousness, right? And when they lived inside these guardrails, they would kind of discover the full 3D image inside, so to speak, the way back to the tree of life again. And the thing is, I think, is that many people will never see the true picture of the law and get past the squigglies of the rule following, the do's and don'ts. But for those who see behind the squiggles, they get to delight in the beauty of the image within. I think this is what Jesus was trying to help us to do whenever in his ministry, whenever he dealt with the law, to see the image behind it all. Because it's the return to an Eden ideal where we can follow Yahweh and find the true life that he offers. And that's kind of what I want to do today. I want to, somewhat simple, I want to help us to start to see the image behind the law through the eyes of Jesus. We've been looking a little bit at that, and I want to show you how did Jesus approach these things. Because the thing is, and we got to understand that Jesus had a deep love, a deep respect for the Torah. He saw the Torah as God's wisdom for Israel. And he also saw himself as what? The fulfillment of it, right? However, we must also understand that Jesus viewed the laws, we're just going to focus on Deuteronomy, but not just Deuteronomy, as not fully embodying God's ideal for human life. We'll see today that he says many of the laws were a concession to Israel's what? Hardness of heart. When Jesus wants to get to the bottom of what the laws of Deuteronomy are about, he doesn't refer to the laws of Deuteronomy. He goes back to what? Anybody know? Back to Genesis, back to creation. And so today what we're going to do, we're going to discuss not just divorce, the ideas we're going to take a look at two different ways that Jesus was interacting with the law, but what did he do with that? We're not just going to talk about divorce and adultery per se in those two, but just how Jesus interpreted the laws of the Torah, how he found God's wisdom within them, and how he saw himself as their fulfillment. So what we're going to do, let's just jump right in. I just want to jump right in today. I want to kind of walk through two instances where Jesus interacted with the law and see what he did. So the first place we're going to be is Matthew chapter 19. Matthew chapter 19. And then we're going to give some time to discuss amongst each other here, like what we've been looking at the last 3 weeks. So look with me at chapter 19, verses 1 through 3. He says, "Now when Jesus finished these sayings, he left Galilee and went to the region of Judea beyond the Jordan River. Large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. Then some Pharisees came to him in order to test him, right? So these Pharisees, these experts in the law, in the Old Testament Torah, they come to Jesus, and this is crucial. What are they wanting to do? They want to what? To test him, right? It's not like they're going to have a legitimate question. It's not like, oh, I really want to know. What do you think, Jesus, right? They wanted to test him. They wanted to lure Jesus into a debate that will expose him and reveal the truth about who he is. Just like when God tests people, is to show their true character. So the goal here was to what? Trap Jesus. So this is what they say to him. They say, is it lawful to divorce a wife for any cause? They ask him a question, right? Right here, they're already going to start tapping into a debate around one certain law in Deuteronomy. And I want you, let's turn back to that, Deuteronomy chapter 24. So we're going to look back at how they use these laws in their time. They say, is it okay to divorce for any reason? Well, where do they get this idea from? Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1. It says, if a man marries a woman and she does not please him because he has found something indecent in her, then he may draw up a divorce document, give it to her, and evict her from his house. Right? Now, the Hebrew here behind the indecent thing, something indecent there, the Hebrew behind this is basically, it means the nakedness of something, okay? So if he finds the nakedness of something, now, I don't know about you, but that's not extremely helpful, right? And honestly, it wasn't helpful for many of the Jews for the 1,500 years, all the way leading up to Jesus' time. What in the world does that mean? If a man finds the nakedness of a thing about his wife? Well, the rabbis, they basically debated, and there was kind of two main thoughts at the time when Jesus came along. One, that it meant adultery. Okay, that's an easy one, right? Maybe it meant adultery. Or second, some major rabbis said that it meant anything. Now, I don't know if that's exactly the two that I would come up with only, but here we are, right? And it's crucial. They're not asking Jesus a random question just off the top of their head. They're inviting Jesus into a debate about a particular law of the Torah, and particularly about one of the popular interpretations. Who do you follow, Jesus? Because if it says one or the other, then they have something that they can say against him, right? This is all calculated. So Jesus answered. Let's go back to Matthew 19. Let's look how he answered them. He said first, he's like, have you not read, in other words, have you not read the Bible? And it's like, I love Jesus sometimes. They're like, they're asking him about the Bible, and he goes, have you not read it? It's like, he says, have you not read from the beginning, the Creator made them male and female, right? For this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and will be united with his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So there are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. He's quoting from what? Genesis what? 1 and 2 there, right? He goes earlier in the Torah. Of course they've read that, right? Haven't you guys read that? I mean, like this is on page 1. So what's Jesus after when he's talking to him, right? He quotes from Genesis 1, made them male and female, and then he quotes from Genesis 2 in the Eden story in verse 5. He's quoting what? From where this singular human does what? Becomes two, so that the two who are other from one another, what? Can become, so one becomes two, so that the two can what? Become one, right? Through covenant and to be able to, what was their command? Be fruitful and multiply, right? What Jesus is doing here is actually some very good biblical theology. He's reading the 7-day creation story in 1 along with the Eden story in chapter 2. And notice that when Jesus is asked a question about the interpretation of a law in Deuteronomy, Jesus, how do you take this law in Deuteronomy, by the way? What does Jesus do? He appeals not to Deuteronomy, but to the what? To the larger narrative going on. The context of all of the Torah, beginning with the Eden story. And I think that's hugely significant of what Jesus is doing. Jesus sees himself and what he's doing as somehow recovering or restoring the people of God to the deep wisdom that God has for creation. And they're revealed, that deepness, that wisdom is revealed not in the laws of Deuteronomy, but where? In a pair of creation stories from the beginning of Genesis. In the Eden ideal itself. This is where you get wisdom about marriage. Jesus is saying to them, there's a divine ideal for marriage. When a man and woman become one, an aspect of God's image is reflected that is so pure, so good, so holy, so beautiful, it must be protected at all costs. That's how he interprets the narratives of the Torah. But that's not the end of it. That's not the end. They go look at verse 7. The Pharisees respond to what Jesus said. They said to him, well, Jesus, why then did Moses command us to give a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her? They're like, if no one should separate marriage, Jesus, then why did Moses say that, what he did? Right? Good question, right? Now notice what they're doing. If you remember, go back to that Deuteronomy quote. Notice anything about what they did with quote. Anybody see anything that they did with the Deuteronomy quote? And then go back to where they talked about it in verse 7. They did what? They changed it, didn't they? What's the first word here? If, right? And so what did they do? This is an if statement. What did they make it into? A when, a command. Moses, they said, commanded us to do it, right? They're quoting from the if section of the law, and if he gives her a certificate of divorce, they're turning the if part into a law, into a command. That's a move on their part, right? That's a move. They made a move there. It shows how they read the laws of the Torah. In other words, they're looking for more than just the actual command of the law, but they're looking for implicit commands, things that are behind it, right? But it's a good question. Even if you could say Moses didn't command it, which he didn't, what? It's clear that he did what? He allowed it, didn't he? Moses allowed it. So why would Moses allow or command a certificate of divorce if, divorce is not the divine ideal? It's a great question, right? It really is. I think these are the things we need to wrestle with in the Word. Well, let's look and see what Jesus says. But Jesus said to them, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives. Why? And what did Jesus do there? He conceded that Moses did permit it, right? In the law. Divorce was permitted in the law, right there. Why? Because of your hard hearts. So why did he permit it? Because God's ideal or because of what? Because of people. He says, but from the beginning, it was not this way. He says, I say to you, whoever divorces a wife, right, he goes on to verse, and later he says, I say to you that whoever divorces his wife except for immorality, the word there is porneia, which you can probably guess what words we get from that, right, and marries another commits adultery. I think there's so much here that we could go into. I'm going to go into some of the details of what does that mean, all that. We're not going to do that for today. But for time's sake, I want to highlight Jesus' views of laws of Deuteronomy are what? Not expressing God's true ideal for human life, right? He says right here that the law is a what? A concession. Because I want us to read the laws within the framework and the approach that Jesus is modeling here. Because it's important that we do this. He sees God's will expressed in the Eden and creation stories as more ideal and true. And he believes that these laws in Deuteronomy reflect many cycles in which God accommodates and concedes to the violence and stubbornness of humans in their failure. And so, yes, he says, you can't just read the laws as they stand now in the way that we interpret them as the pure ideal of God. He says you can't see these as those were the pure ideal of what God intended. We need to understand them in a narrative context, right? What was the phrase he said about them? They had a what? A hardness of heart. Anybody know where that comes from? Pharaoh. Here's a people who've come from one who's had a hardness of heart, and they're starting to do what? Act like the very one that had the hard heart, Pharaoh. In the wilderness, their grumblings in Exodus and Numbers, they're becoming hard-hearted, just like Pharaoh was. And the laws of Deuteronomy had to hold a deeper truth, a more complete one, that these laws are concessions to hard-hearted people within a covenant context. And I think we've got to meditate on this. But I think when we start to do that, we reach kind of the base level of wisdom below it, which is then built upon the laws of the Torah, and then you proceed down the line. God is trying to accommodate a people who have their own culture, have their own problems, and are kind of messed up. And that this process of accommodation is happening in the covenant treaty itself. God is working this out with his people. Do not hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying, and Paul will agree, that there is nothing wrong with the law. The law is good, holy, and right. But it is not the ideal. It never was. But what Jesus is trying to get them and us to is a deeper understanding of how Eden works. We're not striving for laws. We're not striving for rules in this life. We strive for an ideal covenant living. And these laws, they help us to what? They help us to navigate a broken world that's not always great, right? But they were not always meant to be that way, he says. There was meant to be a better way, one that was found, what? All the way back in creation. That's the better way, Jesus is saying. Now, I know that's kind of deep, but let's take a look at another way that he does this. One other time that Jesus was confronted. Turn over to John chapter 8. Very famous story. So John, Jesus is going to be confronted again by him. Look at verses 1 through 6 here in chapter 8 of John. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came to the temple courts again, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. And the experts in the law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in committing adultery. They made her stand in front of them and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us," there it is again, "commanded us to stone to death such women. What then do you say?" Now they were asking this in an attempt to trap him so that they could bring charges against him. So now the Pharisees are also quoting yet again from Deuteronomy. Let's look back at this again. Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 22. Where do they get this whole idea about stoning? Look at verse 22. 22. If a man is discovered in bed with a married woman, both the man lying in the bed with the woman and the woman herself must die. In this way you will purge the evil from Israel. Did you notice anything about the quote? Interesting. They had part of that out, didn't they? They conveniently left the guy out of the quote. And furthermore, what else did they leave out? The man himself. Who's sitting there? Just the woman, right? Makes you go, where's the man in this situation? And what was their motivation for asking? To trap him, right? So what does Jesus do? Rest of 6, Jesus bent down and wrote on the ground with his finger. And when they persisted in asking him, he stood up straight and he replied something. So he starts off, he stoops down and he starts writing in the sand, right? What does he write? No idea. John, and I think it's best that we don't speculate on what it was. Why? John doesn't give any indication of what he writes, ever. So we've got to be careful not to speculate. But then he speaks. Look at this, verse 7. When he stood up and replied, "Whoever among you is guiltless may be the first to throw a stone at her." And then what does he do? He goes back to writing again. Whatever he's writing. How do the people respond? Look at verse 9. Now when they heard this, they began to drift away one at a time, starting with the older ones, until Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Notice it's not what he writes, but what he says that made them walk away, right? Look at verse 10. Jesus stood up straight and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you?" And she replied, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "I do not condemn you either. Go, and from now do not sin any more." "Neither do I condemn you," he says. It's fascinating, right? Did she break the law? Was she committing adultery? Yes, she broke that law in Deuteronomy 22. Is she guilty for it? Yep. Does she deserve the punishment according to Deuteronomy? Sure does. But what does Jesus appeal to? Jesus chooses what? Life over death. The law, and it's interesting, this law is actually a repeat law, believe it or not. It comes from Leviticus 20:10, where there's a little bit different language, where it says, look at this, Leviticus 20:10, those, the adulterer and the adulteress, must be put to death. And that mot, yumot, which basically is mot, which is they should die. In other words, really die with great muchness, right? Want to venture to guess where that phrase first appeared? Anybody? In Genesis, what? Chapter 2. Yeah, Genesis chapter 2, right? The day you eat of the tree of good and knowledge of good and evil, you shall, and all this is, the mot, tamut, is just a different format of the same. It's still mot. If you eat of it, you shall die with muchness, right? But when Adam and Eve ate of the tree, did they die that day? I mean, were they dead at that moment? They didn't. What happened? They were cut off from something. What? Cut off from the tree of life. So, in essence, what's going to happen to them? They will die, right? Yet, what did Yahweh show them in that moment? It's the name of our church. Grace. Grace to not be put to death for the very violation of God's command. Kind of like who? Kind of like this woman caught in adultery. She should surely die, yet what does Jesus appeal to? Does he appeal to the law, or does he appeal to Eden? He appeals to Eden, to the ideal. I think what the law helps us to do is to realize what choices lead us to, what choices lead to life, and what choices lead to death. Better to learn from God's instructions and stay away from the things we think will bring life, but only bring us death, right? Than to choose them and to mess around and find out, right? Yet even in our failings, God can be so gracious to us. His commands are the guardrail to help us understand the deeper meaning behind what he's trying to teach us. He wants us to choose the way of what? Wisdom. Based in his righteousness, knowing that it will lead to our greatest good. And these commands are there to show us the way to life and to help us guard ourselves from choosing death. That's what the whole Sermon on the Mount is about. And we'll get there in a few minutes. But for right now, though, I want us to pause here. I want us to take a little bit of time, and we're going to break up. And if this is your first time here, it's the first time you've done this, don't freak out, okay? This is we want this to be a time that we're not just growing from just Christopher up here preaching, but we're learning from one another. And so I'm going to ask you to break up with a small group. Don't get like 3 or 4 rows of a group, because those of you, you're not going to hear what people 3 rows away say, okay? I see it happens. But turn your chairs around, move and whatever, but get in a small group, maybe 5, 6 people, and just take some time. You've got some discussion questions in your handout. They'll be up here. I'm going to bring some around. But I just want to start us to kind of think through the last 3 weeks and start to apply these together. How can we grow in the wisdom that God's given us? And then I want to hear from you all, and we'll close up with the word. So, ready, set, go, break. There's going to be a timer up here as well for you. I think it should be. You know, and I want to finish. I'm going to read from Matthew 5 to finish out, and yeah, that's good. Thank you. And then we're going to take some time of communion, just remembering what Christ has done, how he's fulfilled this. But before we get there, I just want to, these 3 weeks and kind of this whole year, right? We're coming to the end of Deuteronomy, coming into the Torah, and just trying to think of all of this together. Like, what is this helping us to do? What is this helping us as a people to be able to do? And I think I just want to say, like, let us be a people who do the hard work of studying the Word that God has given us, right? That we're not merely just kind of winging it, but we're looking into His Word to see what He said so we can grow by it, right? We don't want to just be a rule-following people. Instead, that we might be a people that live for righteousness. Righteousness that's based on Jesus. And I say, may we grow in the wisdom He provides through His Word. And we do so, as JJ talked about, as a community, right? Searching the Scriptures together to deepen our wisdom. And I think as a result, we might live for justice both among one another here in our right relationships with one another, but also that we might bring justice to the world around us so that both they and we can eat from the tree of life that's found in Jesus alone. Amen? And so what I want to do, I want to finish the teaching today. I want to read from the Sermon on the Mount. And I just want to kind of just listen and reflect, because Jesus does a lot of it, of what we've just been talking about today. And as you listen, I just want you to see how Jesus points out kind of that 3D image behind each law. Because remember what? He did not come to abolish the law, but to what? To bring it to its fullest understanding. This is what it's leading to. And so listen with me, and I just want you to take a moment to reflect. And I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to ask you to come. When I get done praying, just if you know Christ, come and grab the elements. Take them back to your seat, and we'll take it together to celebrate what Christ has done in fulfilling this. We're not going to do our final song today. We're just going to listen to the Word. We're going to pray, and we're going to take that communion time together. So if you would listen with me from Matthew 5. He says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its flavor, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled on by people. But you are a light to the world. A city located on a hill cannot be hidden. People do not light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before all people, so that they can see your good deeds and give honor to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish these things, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke of a letter will pass from the law until everything takes place. So anyone who breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches others to do so will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever obeys them and teaches others to do so will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness goes beyond that of the experts of the law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard it said, do not murder, and whoever murders will be subjected to judgment. But I say to you that anyone who is angry with his brother is already guilty, will be subjected to judgment. And whoever insults a brother will be brought before the council, and whoever says fool will be sent to fiery hell. So then if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and present your gift. Reach agreement quickly with your accuser while on the way to court, or he may hand you over to the judge will hand you to the warden, and you will be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You've heard that it was said, do not commit adultery, but I say to you, whoever looks at a woman with desire has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. Better to lose one of your members than to have your whole body thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Better to have lose one of your members than have your whole body go into hell. It was said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a legal document. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife except for immorality makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to an older generation, do not break an oath, but fulfill your vows to the Lord. But I say to you, do not take oaths at all, not by heaven, because it's the throne of God, not by earth, because it is his footstool, and not by Jerusalem, because it is the city of the great King. Do not take an oath by your head, because you are not able to make one hair white or black. But let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. More than this is from the evil one. And you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the evil one, the evildoer. But whoever strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other as well. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your coat also. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to the one who asks you, and do not reject the one who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be like your Father in heaven, since he causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Even the tax collectors do the same, don't they? And if you only greet your brothers, what more do you do? Even the Gentiles do the same, don't they? So then, be complete, as your heavenly Father is complete. Let's pray, and then we'll come and take of the communion together. You'll grab your elements and then take them back to your seat, and we'll take them as one.